What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to take a look back at Dante's Inferno, a game that came out back in 2010. We got another 15-year anniversary to look at here, and this is a pretty special game, I would say, to me. I remember it very, very fondly, and so I was looking forward to replaying, and I did replay it from beginning to end, and, this kind of is always brought up in those discussions of God of War clones, right? Something I want to kind of get a little bit into in this video, but I also want to break this game down, story, characters, things like that. Overall, I think it definitely is a good game. I think it kind of falls apart towards the end. We'll talk about that in this video, but I think it's well worth a replay. It doesn't make it too easy on itself to actually be able to play it. Now, I actually have this game physically on the 360, and you can play it, just through EA Play in general, but if you're on PlayStation, that's one that it's just completely wiped from the earth from, so you're going to have a hard time doing it there. And so let's go through this game a little bit. So one thing I very, very much remember about this game is kind of that atmosphere, and it's something that I actually think this game accomplishes really, really well. And it's something that, okay, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, right, when you were having these God of War so-called clones, right? Now, actually, some of the ones I look to as some of the better ones, right, the ones that try to distinguish themselves, or you kind of need to distinguish yourself if you're being called a clone, right? There's got to be something about you that's special. Darksiders was a big one for me, and then Dante's Inferno. And I don't know if I played this game in 2010, but I definitely remember playing it. But I was young, and if you remember this game, and I got to be very careful what I show, in my video here. There's some body parts that are shown. There are some enemies that are quite graphic. And now these are all things that I quite lean into now and say, you know what? I think that helps just the atmosphere, right? That helps kind of the tone of the game. And I'm actually specifically talking about some of the enemy types and some of the bosses. Maybe let's say kind of in the first half of the game, they are big. They're in your face, but they paint a picture of this kind of slimy, disgusting type thing, which honestly I think is one of this game's greatest strengths. And that's something I remember, like the opening of this game is something I remember so well. Him getting stabbed in the back, having to fight, death and all that jazz, taking the scythe. And then, when you go through the layers of hell or the circles of hell, I think the game, especially early on, really does try to separate itself and say, okay, we are taking a very mature look at this. And when you're scaling these walls, when you're fighting these enemies, when you're talking to Virgil, it's dark, and it's supposed to be dark. This is the worst place you could ever imagine, you know what I mean? And it's divided up into categories depending on how bad you are, in your human life, and then you get sent there. It's supposed to be like that, and I think they did, especially early. I don't know, later on it kind of again falls apart. I would say around the trials, the 10 trials, or the 10 challenges, whatever you want to call it, that kind of takes away, I would say, from it. And the general repetition that this game has also kind of takes away from it. I think this game is at its strongest. Well, the story, I think, is really good. We'll get there in a second. The characters are really good. I think just the music, kind of the background type stuff is really good. And also, probably the first half of the game, when you're really starting to explore, like, the earlier circles, like gluttony and stuff, like, they are gross. They put you into that world, I think, extremely, extremely well. And now, obviously, kind of loosely based off the Divine Comedy, right? It's something that, I'll tell you, playing it back, 2010, 2011, whenever I end up doing it, I actually tried as like a 13, 14-year-old to read the Divine Comedy. I remember going like all in. Again, like God of War 3 was kind of my jam back in 2010, and it's actually a video we're going to make on this channel to celebrate its 15-year anniversary. And God of War, by the way, came out like a month after this, has Hades in it. There's a lot of, I would say, similarities between, obviously, God of War and this game in the gameplay mechanics, the ending of the game being the freaking trials, which God of War also actually does before you climb the chains one last time, right? So there's a lot of similarities there, but it also, God of War literally has hell, literally has the souls falling, and it gives it, I think, a different kind of vibe than Dante's Inferno, because Dante's Inferno is kind of just more gross and disgusting and kind of like grim. It's a game that I don't think I could actually play for 20, 30, 40 hours if it was like an open world game, right? This game is short. This game is like 6, 7, 8 hours, and I think that that's probably perfect. You could actually argue it maybe overstays its welcome at certain points, but if you were in this game any longer, I think just how kind of dark and depressing it is would kind of get to you. So yeah, I tried to read the Divine Comedy, didn't get very far, but I do know the structure. I do know how it's broken up, which I am going to get into spoilers, by the way, pretty heavy spoilers. I want to talk about some of the big twists. I want to talk about the ending, and we're going to kind of start that right now, right? the game ends on that cliffhanger. The game literally ends with him about to climb, the mountains of purgatory, basically, right? Which is the second, I think, grouping of poems and stuff. So, the game, I think, was clearly planned for more. There was a little behind-the-scenes stuff that it seemingly is confirmed, or at least was, like, maybe 6-7 years ago, that they did write the next game. The script was done, Dante was done, and playable parts of the game were done, and it was basically going to have this kind of multifaceted, like a climbing mechanic that would like encompass the entire game. Sounded pretty cool. It's something I would have liked to have seen, but the game just didn't do well, which kind of surprised me. I actually thought this game sold better than it did. Seemingly only sold like 1 million or 2 units kind of lifetime, which is sad. I think this game deserves more. I think it was just, again, putting it directly up against its main competition in a game that it's really trying to copy in God of War 3 was probably not the best idea. Anyway, you have a lot of similarities to the Divine Comedy, but they do take some liberties. They take some liberties with Dante's backstory and a couple other things, but you got Virgil, who I think is a great character, and kind of his like echoey, like very strong voice I think is kind of perfect. Now, again, in terms of the interpretation, of that character, they definitely dumbed it down a bit. He's there. He does similar things in the Divine Comedy in terms of like explanation, right? Kind of telling you what each circle is about. And I like that navigator type role he plays in this game. However, there is actually more to it in the source material. The relationship between the two is never really explained or gone into detail at all in the game, when there is a lot more to it, like in the actual thing. So, they missed, I think, some opportunities there. But generally, I'll tell you, I mentioned the atmosphere and kind of the tone. I think that's a really big positive, and that's something that immediately sets this game apart from even the clones, right, that it's kind of mimicked after. But I actually think the story and characters in this game are quite good. So Virgil, being an example, Dante, he doesn't have too much to say. He almost, it's actually funny because I'm thinking about Kratos, and Kratos specifically in that era, and one of the big complaints that I actually never really agreed with, I was never really on the complaint bandwagon. He's too one-dimensional. He yells a lot, right? There's really not that much to him. I think it's true at times, but just not all the time. Dante is interesting, right? Because it's about kind of filling in his life. And I think that's where the story is quite good. And I think the acting of Dante and Beatrice and Lucifer, there's a really strong cast, whether it's like the voice actors or you're talking about the characters themselves. Very strong. And the story, pretty simplistic, especially with the Divine Comedy, I think, being much more complicated to understand. But in terms of what they did with, I would say, almost dumbing it down, I think they actually did a really good job. So, what is it, right? So he goes off, he fights a war, and in that fight, Beatrice makes a deal with the devil. And in exchange for Dante's protection, she wagers that he'll be faithful to her the entire time that he's over there, right? That does not happen, and this is revealed to you through a bunch of flashbacks. Now, I think this game, number one, looks beautiful. The CG moments, heavily CG, like the very beginning of the game, and they'll sprinkle in some big CG moments as the game goes. Honestly, dare I say, still holds up. Like, especially the opening, I don't know if I'm allowed to show it, but when he's sewing himself, like the skin and the freaking needle has to go through his skin. I mean, I'm not good with needles, so I don't like that just in general, but it feels real. It felt real back in 2010. It's still, I think it looks insanely good. This is a very beautiful, and again, like, it's beautiful, but at the same time, the game is kind of disgusting at times, right? With some of the enemies and just, like I mentioned, some of the walls and, like, gluttony. Like, it's not meant to be a pretty game, but when I say the game is beautiful, like, I think they did a really good job with that, right? But visuals still hold up, audio still holds up, and I think they do a really good job of delivering, the story. Again, pretty simple. It's a deal with the devil. Dante basically loses his side of it. He gets stabbed, and you don't really know. It's actually something I forgot about. I don't know if the game does, like, the best job with it, but there is that twist, right, where he gets stabbed in the beginning. He pulls the thing out, and he's like, okay, well, I'm fine now. I'm just going to kill death. And then at the end of the game, you realize, no, actually, he died, like, then and there, and then he still killed death. And, he got lured into hell. Lucifer knew that stuff was going to happen. I do like his arc, right, about, like, basically he doesn't know any of this. Maybe he, like, put it out of his memory, and then it starts to get filled back in with, like, what happened to his mom and his brother and his dad, and, the kind of legacy that they left for him, or, that he started to take on some of their traits. And then, you have the battles with some of these people, or kind of trials with it. And then you have the filling in the blanks of his life, right? That he did some not great stuff overseas, and it definitely resulted, obviously, in Beatrice being summoned and taken by Satan, and then obviously has to fight for her back. I think it's I think it's a little rushed in terms of where he gives up. So specifically talking kind of at the very end of the game before you fight Lucifer, I guess I get it to a degree. Like, he fills in the final parts of his memory and he's like, all right, I give up. Like, I deserve to be here. I think the recognition that he's done bad stuff, and he's like, no, this whole time I've been fighting for you, for both of us to get out of here, but in reality, I deserve to be here, but you don't, so I'm going to save you. I like that. I definitely like it. He gives up in the moment, right? Puts the cross down, and I think it's a really cool scene. They introduce Gabriel, really, not even, I think, by name in that moment, but, he's in the game, and I think that's super cool. And then you fight the devil, and I think those big story moments are executed pretty darn well. And I just think the general story, and even the final twist, right, where, like, he knew that Dante was going to do that. He lured him in, like, he wanted him basically to break and completely destroy hell so that Satan could, kind of rise and have his second go at heaven, which I think, these elements that I've spent so long talking about, this is the best part of the game. Now, it's got serviceable gameplay, and we're going to go into that in a second, but I think that's really the elements of this game that stands out. The story, the characters, the atmosphere, all those kind of things, I think they still hold up. I honestly think they still hold up rather well. Now, in terms of the gameplay, okay, why is it a God of War clone? Well, you play the game for like 5 seconds, even camera angles, right? Walking into environments and, gates kind of rising up from the ashes, on both sides. You have to fight a wave of enemies, the recycling of enemies, things like that. There's so much, about this game that you have seen about 1,000 times. Now, does the game try to break free of this in any way? It does and it doesn't. I think it actually kind of likes to be in its little thing. I mean, I will say the scythe is super cool. I would say the holy cross, right? Like using the holy and unholy kind of movement set or a combat set is extremely good. And I will say it's fun to play. It's fun to play. It's fun to invest. And there's kind of like a dual currency system, right? Where you have souls, or you have like your currency just to put into like power ups and level ups, right? But you also have to pick which one you want. And, for me, I actually went, for most of the game, I went just the holy route. I was trying to almost max it out, see if I could play the whole game just by really relying on that cross. And I did. I would say throughout most of the game, the cross is highly reliable. It can chain together attacks. It can keep things going. It can also attack enemies from afar. And it took me a while to get into like the parrying kind of system, which I do think is rewarding, but it took me a bit. So I figured I'll fight from far away. And that's what I did. But, you kind of need both, because you do need to chain together attacks, and it's good to have your scythe powered up at least a little bit. The unholy side has like the health upgrades, the magic upgrades, right? Things that you need in order to survive, especially towards the very end where the game just decides to throw unfair things at you that we'll get to in this video. But, there is there's that kind of game within a game, okay, which I can't appreciate. And I will say even the judgment type stuff, it's not really, I don't even want to call it like an illusion of choice, because, I actually do like the mechanic of finding these people, right, in all of these layers, and you pick them up or you grab them by the throat or whatever, and you read their bio. And I think that's something, if you were to ever like remake this game, that's something I think I would like expand it a little bit, because I think that's actually really, really fascinating, and it doesn't really lead anywhere, right? Because if you choose to like, absolve them of sin, I do like the visual representations of these things. However, when you choose like the holy path, right, you do that cross mini game, which I like those mini games. Like, I'm quick with like button presses, and I would routinely get 30, 35, 40, 42, 43 was kind of my max souls. And you can really rack up like your second currency by doing that. Okay, I actually think it's quite beneficial in that way. However, it becomes over and over, and you do it like, I don't even want to count, maybe 15 to 20 times. And again, I think the basis of it is cool in terms of kind of reading like what they did, right, and how it connects to the circle of hell that you're in. I actually think that's quite clever. But it ends up resulting in, you'll get bonus basically for holy or unholy. If you choose the unholy one, right, where you kind of condemn them, you don't even do a mini game, which is kind of weird. Like, one of them has a mini game, the other doesn't, but it's for the same purpose. It's for those points that are used for one of the two things, but only one of them has a mini game attached. So it's odd, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, like the story lore you really should be like doing the holy path, especially what you do to Satan at the very end of the game. You are, I think, supposed to choose the holy path, but that's one element. And again, I'm trying to focus on, well, what makes this different, because beyond that, it's that hack and slash stuff. And now look, I like it. I like hack and slash. I like quick time events. That's another thing that maybe sets me apart from other people. I grew up, okay, with like the PS3 era. I grew up with God of War 3. And so that was kind of like the norm when people were complaining about there being too many quick time events in Heavy Rain, in God of War. By the way, all games that are from 2010. I actually was like, this is normal. I think this is normal because this is what I'm kind of growing up on. So I never really found it to be that big of a problem. This game goes a little, Kratos in God of War 3 is like destroying Hades, destroying Poseidon to start the game, stuff like that. But it's a different kind of brutality that Dante has, right? So the quick time events, I think, actually serve it quite well. The gameplay itself is very serviceable. It is fun. It's fun to mix the two. I think the main thing is, right, you have to throw things to kind of like get you out of that repetition. And I think that's something that God of War kind of mastered, over time. I don't think that happens here. I would say, like I keep mentioning, really a lot of the elements of this game start to repeat / just die down with how excited I got over them by the halfway point. When you condemn or absolve like 10 people, it becomes less and less, right, as you keep going. Once you've seen a couple layers of hell, and then enemies start to repeat, right? Like, they do add them here and there, but generally, like, those like minotaur, like beast looking things, towards the end of the game, they just attach wings to them, right, and they're flying, and then you cut the wings off, and they just become the base enemies you've been fighting this whole time. Or they'll give them like the silver kind of like shield and sword, right, or axe or whatever it is, right? So it's the same enemies. It's basically the same stuff over and over. So that is something that I think does get in the game's way, where it needs to be as long as it is for the story. And, because you throw in some of the bosses, which I actually think are quite good, and the connections to Dante, right? He's got to go through his mom, his father, and his brother, right? So you have to go through that. You have to go through his memory loss and kind of filling that in. But it needs to be that long for the story. Doesn't need to be that long for anything else, because the environments even start to repeat. You're gonna shimmy down the same like bone structures that you've been doing the whole game, going across the wire, and it repeats too much. And the layers, I would say, start to blur, or the circles, I keep calling them layers, the circles of hell tend to start to blend. And that's why I, in this video, focus, like Gluttony really stands out to me, and some of the earlier ones really stand out because you're just in it. And the game's the tone of this game, as I keep mentioning, is just so different. Like, it feels almost uneasy to be in this game, and I think that works. I actually think that gives this game a really strong like spirit, right? Some originality to it that I think is really good. But the issue is, then when you're in it, it doesn't change too much after that. So like the first couple hours, you're like, I've experienced a game like this before, but it's also, again, the atmosphere and tone is so different. But then it's like, okay, well, now I'm just repeating the same thing over and over, and the enemies are the same, and even some of like the bigger beasts that you can take over. And when you're not doing your hack and slash, you're kind of walking, controlling the beast movement, that's too repetitive too. And then you get to the end of the game, and I think it borderline falls apart with those trials. I think are terrible, like unbelievably bad. I don't know why they did. I forgot. I must have like Dumbledored that thing out of my mind. Harry Potter. I can't believe how bad it is, because the whole game is kind of about choice. It's about how do you want to fight these enemies, and you can go different routes, and it's fine. The game actually, I think, serves it quite well. The end of the game, literally the last 30 minutes, okay? Then you walk across a thing of ice, and then you fight Satan, okay? Those trials are the end of the game, and they're so bad. It's just about, the only thing that sets them apart is you walk into the room. All the rooms look the same. You do the same thing every time. You can save, you can get health, and you can get your magic, and then you go and you do another trial, right? And you have Beatrice telling you, oh, this is the area for priests that were this or that, right? And that's all it is. And that tells you, okay, stay in the air for 10 seconds, or kill 3 enemies in the air, or don't block, there's one that's like get a hit combo of 100. Now, I actually got a hit combo of like 120 early, like the first fight in the game. So I'm used to it. I'm good at these games. So it didn't trouble me too badly. But it's just, why did they force us to do 10 10 things very specifically in a row. By the time you're at 3, for me, when I got to the 3rd trial, I said, Jesus Christ, there's no way. Jesus Christ is actually quite ironic for a game like this. It's crazy. Why are we doing this? So you're 3 in, and I have to do 7 more freaking trials? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And you got to do it perfectly. Otherwise, you are stuck there. So you have that. And then you have the battle with Lucifer, which honestly, I will say is actually one of the worst battles in the game as well. I think it's, again, story-wise, it's coming to a head, and it's these twists, and it's cool moments. And he's cool. Like, his design, I actually like him as like that shadow figure, right? All black, kind of like almost like a Dementor type situation going on. I really like that, okay? Then when he becomes more of like, the Thorn type thing, I mean, he looks cool. It's just I kind of prefer him in the more deceptive role. I think he's great. I think he's a great character. I love, they lean into it, right? They lean into who he is. He's deceptive. He's going to prey on kind of what you're weak to, but he calls Dante his friend so much, right? It's like this buddy relationship, but like his end goal obviously is not necessarily a good thing. He's literally the freaking devil. So I think they did that so well. But the fight, I don't know, it's the big, huge boss, and it deals way too much damage to you, I feel. Didn't have fun with that. And then even when he shrinks into like a smaller form, it's so repetitive. You do very little damage to him, and maybe that was just me, but I kind of got level 5 on both sides. I was quite powerful the whole game, and you just whack at him, whack over and over and over, and it just feels like you don't do a lot of damage to him. So general point is, I think the game does, the game's 6, 7, 8 hours, and the last hour is not good. You will spend 30, 40 minutes on those trials, and you will most likely not enjoy it. You'll spend 20 minutes, in the last boss fight, and it's not one of the better boss fights in the game, and that's how they chose to end the game. So I just, again, I stand by what I said. I think for the story and the characters and a lot of that stuff, the game needed to be, 7 hours long. But from the gameplay, it actually probably should have been like 4. I truly, genuinely, that's what it should have been, because it has good things, but it's got that repetition. It's like, well, okay, as long as maybe it breaks it up and throws different things at you, but it does not do a good job at that, right? So you're just constantly doing it, and then you get to the end of the game, and I think it just falls apart. It is definitely a good game, and it's one I will truly always remember. I'll never forget, being 13, 14 in my car, driving. My parents drive to Canada. My mom's Canadian. So, and I would read. I actually had the Divine Comedy. Like, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget playing it for the first time. I'll never forget, I've kind of danced around it because I don't know what you're necessarily allowed to show and say, on YouTube. But you think of like the body parts of some of these characters. Now, some of the girls' enemies, right, smaller enemies in this game, they got something going on, let's say. But you also think about some of the stuff that they show in the game as well. Imagine you being 13, 14. I was trying to like hide that from my parents, where it's like, I'm not interested. I just want to play the game. You don't have to take the game away from me. So, I'll always remember it. I think it is a overall good game. It's one of my favorite of these clone games. And in a lot of ways, it is a clone game. It does enough, I'd say, to separate itself from God. And I'll always think of it separate from God of War, right? But it does have issues, especially as I've gotten older and have this kind of critical eye that I have now. It is not perfect. It's definitely rough around the edges, but it is one I would like more. Like, if they made a second game, and again, it literally ends on a cliffhanger. I love him ripping his cross off. It turns into the snake. I think that's freaking awesome. So I would have absolutely taken more. Probably would have taken more back then too, but I can still take more now if they want. But this was made from Visceral, Dead Space. They ended their lifespan with Battlefield Hardline, I believe was the game. So they're no longer around. This game, the franchise is no longer around. It's not happening. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.